Well, here we are looking at the last part of chapter 1 of Lamentations, and it's entitled Lament, and Confession. Well, but before we begin, let me give you a list of psalms which are laments themselves, a list that I promised you when we first began. I'm just now getting around to it. The 5 psalms that are known as laments are Psalm 10, 63, 69, 74, and 79. Actually, we'll look at part of Psalm 69 a bit later in this session. But now, let's take a look at the final section of chapter 1. If you remember from our introduction, this is the 4th part. It is the city's confession, and it's in verses 18 through 22. But first, I want to back up and redo verse 17. Remember, it was the poet's single verse lament. So, and he interrupted the widow as she spoke and told of her problems with the past grandeur of Jerusalem versus the current desolation that existed. So we go back to verse 17, which, if you remember, if you have a better memory than I do, is Peh, P-E-H, the 17th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Lamentations 1:17. Zion stretches out her hands. There is no one to comfort her. The Lord has commanded concerning Jacob. So the poet's now going from Jerusalem and extending to the entire Judah, the entire nation of Judah. That the ones, and this is what, line 4, that the ones round about him, that would be Judah's neighbors, should be his adversaries. Jerusalem has become an unclean thing among them. So that which was to have been and was God's elect nation, his tool for reaching the world, is now considered unclean. Note that the set of these 3 pairs of statements is given by the poet, agreeing with the widow in her assessment, and he's writing this as he does as verse 17. And if I paraphrase again, line 1, Jerusalem is portrayed as praying with uplifted arms, praying to Yahweh. And line 2, because she has no one else who will help. She's alone in this process of grieving for her long-lost lover, which was the city itself, of course. Evidently, Yahweh decreed something about Judah. That's line 3. Line 4 is the explanation that Judah's neighbors would be as enemies. That certainly was true of a number, namely Ammon, Edom, and you can find various places in the Old Testament that will attest to the Ammonites fighting with Israel and the Edomites fighting. The Edomites actually were probably the most consistent of Israel's enemies. Think back. There are others. The Moabites, Ammonites and Moabites, both, of course, are descended from Lot, Abraham's nephew. So Ammonites and Moabites would be cousins of the Jews, if you please, as would be Edomites. Remember, the Edomites are descended from Esau, Jacob's brother. And there are others. Of course, there's the Ishmaelites, who were descended from Ishmael. Well, it makes good sense, right? A son of Abraham. And there were also the Midianites, who were descended from Midian, one of Abraham's sons through Keturah after Sarah died. So all of these neighbors that were surrounding, with the exception perhaps of the Philistines, everybody else was essentially a cousin of the Jews and were all Semites. So there was no anti-Semitite effort here. That didn't sound quite right, but you got the point, I think. That all of Judah's neighbors that were their enemies were also their cousins and were related to them. They weren't fundamentally most of the Canaanites that had nothing to do with Abraham before he arrived in Canaan. And in line 5, Jerusalem ain't what she was. Jerusalem used to be glorious, grandeur, wealth, power in the region. Now she is desolate. And line 6, she sits among her neighbors as unclean, defeated, and desolate. So that's what the lament of the poet is telling us, and he will now return the microphone to Lady Zion, the widow. First one is Sadiq. I'll spell that for you as best I can. Tzadik. And it's the widow again is resuming the conversation with us. So Lamentations 1:18, line 1, the Lord is righteous. Now she's going to explain her fault in this. The Lord is righteous. Line 2, for I have rebelled against his command. In other words, she's saying, I know this is happening because we have broken the covenant. Line 3, hear now, all people. She's saying, listen up. But behold my pain. Line 4. So she's back to the pointing again. Yes, I'm responsible. The Lord is righteous. I have rebelled against him. Now I'm in pain, my own doing. I'm in the pain. My virgins and my young men, all my young people, have gone into captivity. Line 6. So, let me go back and sort of give you a brief translation or a Hornerism of these lines. Line 1, God, he's okay, he's right, he's righteous. He didn't do anything wrong, even though she's going to get to the point of making sure you understand that God is the causal agent for all of her pain right now. But he's the causal agent because she has violated the covenant. So it's all working out in the wash, but she's spelling it out. Line 2, me, yeah, God, he's okay. Me, not so much. I've had rebellion, and that's a no-no, of course. I am the ultimate responsible, not ultimate. I am the near responsible causal agent. This is happening because of my own behavior, God's reaction to it. Line 3, anybody who'll listen, let me tell you. Line 4, I really am in severe pain because of my sin. And when we get into chapter 2, we're going to find that this word severe becomes front and center, because one of the titles will be the severity of Yahweh. Line 5, all the young of the city, where are they? Well, line 6, they've gone into exile. Well, let us go on to verse 19 now. I'm going to give you the Hebrew word, if I can. I don't know. Kof, Q-O-F. That's the 19th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Lamentations 1:19, line 1. I called to my lovers. That would, of course, since she represents Judah, or Jerusalem and Judah also, that would be any allies she has, people she relied upon for protection or agreement of various things and sorts. Line 2, but they, my lovers, deceived me. Line 3, my priests and my elders, the people who should be leading me, perished in the city. So there's no religious or spiritual help for me. When did they perish? Line 5, while they sought food. So there's some kind of drought, some kind of shortage of food. This could have been during the siege for 2 years, when you couldn't go out and raise food or go get food. And in line 6, to restore themselves, restored their strength themselves. So what she's saying, my priests and my elders, rather than being around to help me spiritually, are gone. They were left to get food, and they didn't make it back. They were taking care of themselves, not the rest of us. So, there we go. So let's look again, and I'll give you a bit of a translation, although I've probably been doing that right along, so it probably will be nothing new, maybe just reinforce the ideas. Line 1, having received no help, I called for my lovers, my allies. Line 2, but I received only deception. There was no help. Line 3, my religious and sacred and also regular government advisors, so both religious advisors and government advisors. Line 4, they're all gone, dead, perished. So I've got no help there either. My allies do nothing but deceive me. People who are supposed to be my advisors, dead or perished. And the irony is they died while looking for food to revive themselves. So they went out looking on their own for their own good. They ended up gone. So I have no one. It's as if she's gone as far in her pity party as she can possibly go. But have no fear, she's not yet finished. And so the question remains at this point, is her depth of suffering warranted? Is her depth of suffering fair? And if it's not fair, guess who gets the blame for that? Has Yahweh been too severe? She's acknowledged already in a cursory manner. She's acknowledged that God's behind all of this, and she seems to accept that fact. But it looks as though she's questioning whether Yahweh has gone too far. Could the widow really be protesting Yahweh's severity? That's certainly a possibility. In this case, of course, it's really the poet who's protesting under her rubric, if you please. Line 5, expressed, and this is his severity expressed against his own people, his own elect, and that's going to play in it later. It also plays into the judgment of those who come against God's elect. And the final line, 6, is severity really an attribute of Yahweh? Think about it. One of the things you'll find through Lamentations, and it goes through what Lady Zion is experiencing, the questioning of who really is Yahweh. Do I know him really, or do I have some different idea of who he is, an idea that is not right? And of course, if you have an idea about God that is wrong, you worship a false God. The God of your making, the God in your mind, is not necessarily your God. So you may be worshiping an improper God. That's why I've raised the question here, is severity really an attribute of Yahweh? If you want to come on Sunday mornings, we'll talk about that. And the answer, though, is very clear. Yes, severity is an attribute of God. God has wrath. Wrath is one of his attributes. And yet it is a positive attribute, just as his justice is a positive attribute. And when you put his justice and his wrath besides his love, you have some explaining to do. Let me go to Romans 11:22 and show that Scripture says God is severe, can be severe. And usually it's in response to something that violates his sense of propriety. Romans 11:22, at least the first part of it. Behold then the kindness and severity of God. And he's going on to explain it. Here's two examples. To those who fell, severity. What's he talking about here? He's talking about Jews, Israel, Judah, as it rejected Christ as the Messiah. He said when the Jews rejected their Messiah, they fell, and God dealt with them severely. Excuse me. And in the last part of this verse, but to you, he's speaking now to Gentiles principally in Rome, to you God's kindness. So what's he saying? The Jews rejected their Messiah, so God dealt severely with them in order to turn his attention to Gentiles to bring them into the kingdom of God. And if you think that has nothing to do with Israel, go back, because this is where Paul describes that if you have been saved, if you are elect, if you are in the kingdom of God, you have been grafted into the nation of Israel. So if you are a part of the nation of Israel, you are part of God's kingdom. The covenants are yours. In particular, the new covenant in Christ's blood. Keep this in mind. As we're going to eventually get a further look at severity, and we're going to ask this question. If God can be severe toward his own, and that's what Paul was claiming, yes, he was severe towards Israel, and this is what Lady Zion is arguing also. Hey, God's been severe to me. This is the question now, will he be severe in judgment of his enemies? When God exercises his judicial fairness, will that be severe to those who are not saved? These things all come together, folks. They're not separated ideas. So what really Lady Zion is arguing about is, if God can be severe to me, and if that turns out to be fair and just, watch out if you are outside the camp. So, let's go back to look at the last, we got 3 more verses in chapter 1, as the widow continues her prayer for deliverance. And verse 20, Resh, R-E-S-H, the 20th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Lamentations 1:20, line 1, See, O Lord, for I am in distress. She's keeping that in front of Yahweh. Line 2, my spirit is greatly troubled. She's, again, she's in distress. Her spirit is greatly troubled, saying the same thing. Those are kind of parallel statements in this case. Line 3, my heart is overturned within me. She's just giving further expression to her distress. For I have been very rebellious, but now she's accepting some responsibility for this state that she's in. Line 5, in the street the sword slays. Line 6, in the house it is like death. So she's describing the physical existence that she's facing now. Again, you got 6 statements, 3 pairs. They continue her description of that suffering state that she's in, and is taking her to a confession of fault in the matter. So she's being somewhat honest. She doesn't fully understand how God can do this to her, and to Israel, to Judah, to Jerusalem in particular. My translation, slightly translations. Now, line 1, now Yahweh is asked Yahweh is asking you to take a look at my present condition. That didn't make any sense, did it? She's asking Yahweh to, hey, come on, Lord, please take a look at me. Look at the situation I'm in. Is it really necessary to be this severe? She doesn't say that, but you get the sense that that's what she's trying to get at. Line 2, I am troubled deep within my spirit. This isn't just some cursory, I stumbled and hurt my big toe. No, it's way beyond that. Line 3, my heart is turned upside down. Why? What's going on? Line 4, I have acted rebellious toward you. I know I'm guilty. I know I've sinned against you. Line 5, Israelites are struck down by Babylonian swords as they walk the streets. my people are dying out on the streets, Lord, and I am at fault. This is line 6. My sin has brought all this. I know that. So she has confessed her guilt before God, but she is falling back into a pity party again and requesting, I call it here, lex talionis, which is Latin for the law of retribution. And she's asking that lex talionis be invoked against her enemies, who are Yahweh's enemies. See, that's one of the things that's really bothering her. Not that she's, as the nation is being judged by God, is being disciplined by God, but he's using his own enemies, the Babylonians, to do it. The worst guys in the neighborhood, in the region, the most evil of all nations, God is using to discipline her nation, herself. And Deuteronomy 7:9, you get a little bit more information about this kind of thing. Deuteronomy 7:9 and 10. Know therefore that Yahweh, your God, he is God, the faithful God, who keeps his covenant and his loving kindness to 1,000 generations with those who love him and keep his commandments, but repays those who hate him to their faces, to destroy them. He will not delay with him who hates him. He will repay him to his face. What is that saying? It said, if you are under the covenant, you keep the covenant, it's all kindness, goodness, graciousness, mercy, prosperity, if you please. In those days, it was part of the thought. But she says, you oppose God, and he's going to bring in lex talionis. He's going to bring in retribution. You will pay for your opposing him. Okay, verse 21. Shin, S-H-I-N. Number 21, Lamentations 1:21. Again, 6 lines. They have heard that I groan. There is no one to comfort me. People, everybody around knows I'm hurting, but none of them can comfort me. All my enemies have heard of my calamity. Everybody who's against me knows what's going on. And here's the key. They are glad that you have done it. They said, you God's elect? Look at you. Look at what God, your one who has elected you, chosen you, you say. Look at what he's done to you. That's pretty cool, isn't it? And line 4, where am I? Line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, that which you would bring. Oh, that. I wish that, if you prefer, that you would bring the day which you have proclaimed. That would be something equivalent to the day of Yahweh, the day of the Lord, the day of wrath, and that's akin to the end times finish of things when Christ returns. And last line, that they may become like me. What she's saying? Okay, Lord, I got you. You got me in this position. Now, look at my enemies. Look at your enemies. Put them in the same position. Let them face what I'm facing. Don't let them off scot-free. And of course, God never lets anyone off free when they mess with his elect. So again, let me do a little translation. All I'm doing is saying, I told you what these 6 lines are. Now I'm going to tell you again, maybe slightly different words. And when we finish, I may even do it a 3rd time, hoping that you'll catch something along the way. It's a teacher's arrogance showing, I guess. Line 1, my enemies all know how I get groan under this suffering, but none are there to provide comfort for me. As a matter of fact, they all know this, line 3. Line 4, my enemies revel in your judgment of me. They're making fun of me, Lord. They're having a ball, saying, how great is this? Look what their God has done to them. Line 5, you have promised a day of the Lord. Let them face judgment at least as nasty as mine. It's like in some of the Psalms, David will say, break their teeth, Lord. Break my enemies' teeth. That's called an imprecatory psalm. But there are a number of those around. David doesn't pull any punches. He said, if they're my enemies, I want you to do this, that, and the other thing to them. And it ain't pretty. Notice how line 4 turns from pain and suffering to a focus on the enemy. Because she's saying now, here's my enemy. They know about this, but they're having a ball while I suffer this desolation, this pain, this upsettingness, this doubting of my God because of what he's doing to me. My wondering, is he really this severe in judgment? The widow's plea sounds a lot like, again, the imprecatory Psalms of David. Hit them in the teeth, Lord. They're sitting there smiling, laughing at me, bust their teeth out. Verse 22, the final verse of chapter 1, I think is called Tav, T-A-V. In Lamentations 1:22, again, 6 lines. We've had 6 lines in every one of these except, what was it? Verse 7 had 8 lines. Well, in chapter 2, we'll have another one that has 8 lines. Goes that like this, line 1, let all their wickedness come before thee. She's asking God to really study the wickedness of those who are doing this, the Babylonians in particular. Line 2, and deal with them. Line 3, how do I want you to deal with my enemies? As you have dealt with me for all my transgressions. I know this is payback for my sin, my objections to you, my getting in the way of your will and not adhering to it, not keeping the covenants. I know why you've done this to me. Now I want you to do that same thing to them, because they're doing to me what you shouldn't permit. For my groans, line 5, for my groans are many, and my heart is faint. Again, moderate translation. Check their wickedness, Yahweh, then deal with them and their wickedness. In the same way, this is how I want you to deal with them, Lord. In the same way you have dealt with me and my sins. Line 5, I'm still suffering, however, and I've about had all I can handle. Well, the widow would likely have known that God always judged any nation that he uses as his tool in discipline in either Judah or the northern kingdom. As a matter of fact, I think we've looked at this before, but I'll do it again now. I'm going to look at Isaiah 10, 5 and 6. And this is Isaiah speaking to Assyria after Assyria had demolished the northern kingdom and brought it to an end as discipline for the northern kingdom's error and sin and opposition to God's plan, violation of covenant, all those things. The northern kingdom had already been through it 150 years earlier, like 722 BC or something like that. And here's Isaiah speaking from God to Assyria. Woe to Assyria. When you start with woe, it ain't good. You can bet on it. Woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger. And of course, the my here refers to Yahweh. So he said, Syria did my bidding, but woe to them for it. And the staff in whose hands is my indignation. He's saying, yeah, they're my tool. I use them to discipline the northern kingdom. As a matter of fact, not only did they discipline them, they wiped out the northern kingdom, never for it to become a kingdom again. And it never has. Verse 6, I send it, that's Assyria, against a godless nation, that's the northern kingdom Israel, and commission it against the people of my fury. Who are those people? His own people from the northern half of Israel. To capture booty and to seize plunder. He said, I'm sending Assyria to do this ravaging of the northern kingdom and to trample them down like mud in the streets. Now, this is as bad as what Lady Zion is experiencing and talking about. And after all of that, Assyria did, God then adds in verse 12 of Isaiah 10, this is after he's described everything that Assyria did to the northern kingdom. So it will be that when the Lord has completed all his work on Mount Zion and on Jerusalem, he will say, I will punish the fruit of the arrogant heart of the king of Assyria and the pomp of his haughtiness. God says, I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to judge them. You can count on that. And what was he going to do and punish them for? Arrogant heart and pomp of his haughtiness. Attitude and intent when Assyria destroyed the northern kingdom. They destroyed it for their own reasons, not God's reasons. God chose them to be his tool, but they made their own decisions, and he said, I will judge them. If you go back to Habakkuk, it's a short 3-chapter book, where God told Habakkuk what he would do to discipline Judah. This is Judah we're talking about here again. Back to Lady Zion. He says, I am going to bring the most evil nation in the region against Judah to discipline Judah because of her sin and her breaking of the covenant. But once I do that, he told Habakkuk, I will judge Babylon. So Babylon was coming to do God's work, but they were doing it in the haughtiness and the intent of their own evil hearts. And for that, they would be disciplined by God. Only it will be a very severe form of discipline. Think about it to this point. Babylon, once God destroyed Babylon or defeated Babylon by the Medes, Babylon never became a major power again. So the widow knows that God's going to do that. He's going to punish Babylon. She's asking for him to do it in at least as severe a way as he has disciplined her. And so whatever they did in their siege and their devastation and destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, they will pay. She's already said, they're mocking me, Lord. They're making fun of me. See what your God has done to you? Well, that's where we are. She has laid it out on the line. She has accepted responsibility because of her own actions. At least the poet has done it for her. So what's next? Well, what's next is going to be God's anger, his wrath, his severity. So we don't wait a long time to talk about the severity of God. We're going to do it next time. Let me ask you a simple question. Are you sure you can let God be God? Truly? Really? And do you know what that might mean? It's something you're going to face in the next 4 chapters of Lamentations. And you should, because most of us do not spend a great deal of time of thinking through for ourselves what the severity of God means, what the wrath of God means, what the justice of God means. We don't think that through. We assume it's okay. Big deal. It may be hurtful. It may be costly. But can you let God have that right? It's something that we will try to help you get through and study and face. You can't walk away from this. It is true. It exists. We need to face it as believers. Jerusalem had a bit of difficulty dealing with that. You can see it in Lady Zion's pity party, as I called it. I don't think it was intended as a pity party, but it's certainly a description that sounds like one. And if we were humans, that would be exactly what it would be. She had trouble dealing with that. She wasn't sure that God had been reasonable in his discipline. We'll see if we have any better luck with those issues. Look